the world economy is still going through tough times. United States, the European Union, as well as major economies in Asia are reeling under stunted growth numbers and looking at bleak growth prospects. In such conditions, the travel and tourism industry has clearly taken a hit, in particular business travel. However, the constraints have also led to innovative business models in the aviation sector and a spurt in low-cost carriers. To examine the changing nature of the business travel management industry and to discuss tactics to optimize results, Bloomberg TV India, in association with APTI, organized the APTI Business Travel Forum 2013, a day-long conference on business travel that brought together the top minds of the industry. In the first part of the series, we bring you highlights from the discussion on changing trends and the rise of budget airlines.
Hello and a very warm welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a pleasure gathered here today to be able to talk about business travel, a space that is fast evolving, throws up several opportunities, and obviously in difficult times, the challenges are many, and to be able to deliver those kind of efficiencies when we talk about business travel becomes very crucial, especially for companies that lend these services to corporate houses. And for this, we have a great panel with us today. It's great to have you with us. Perhaps we can start with a little bit of perspective from you, Peter, because you've understood the European and the US markets when it comes to low-cost carriers in particular. Where do they stand today? How have they changed ever since they came in? Have they changed the scenario, especially post-2008?
Well, I think specifically in Europe and the US, what we've seen is traditional carriers having to play catch-up against the low-cost carrier model. So we know the low-cost carriers originally came into the marketplace intending to try and capture consumers who were going to go on holiday in Europe or somewhere within the US. But because of the low fares, and particularly because of the economic climate that we were operating in, they actually became quite attractive to corporates, and they became quite attractive to corporate travelers, specifically starting in the SME marketplace, but then moving up, into bigger corporate-type environments. And really, it caught traditional carriers on the hop. They were, pretty cumbersome, a little bit, overweight, shall we say, and their costs were pretty high. And as a consequence, a portion of their marketplace at the back of the aeroplane, particularly, drifted off and went to visit these low-cost carriers. What we've now seen, sort of 5, 6, 7, 8 years later, is actually the traditional airlines at the back of the plane, often operating almost a low-cost carrier model, and low-cost carriers forward integrating into the traditional airline space. And they're able to do that because they're more nimble, they're fitter, healthier, and their cost overhead is considerably lower. So whilst traditional airlines, for example, are having to negotiate with unions over wages, they have vast numbers of staff that they're not necessarily able to make redundant, and they've got big infrastructure overhead. These smaller airlines, these low-cost carrier-type airlines, don't have these particular problems. And as a consequence of that, what we're seeing is that they're really able to offer some of the services that the traditional airlines offer. You have to pay for them, admittedly, but it makes them very, very attractive to travelers.
That's right. But, when you talk about the Indian context in terms of how it started in Europe and America, slightly different, wouldn't you say?
Yes, it indeed is slightly different. When low-cost carriers started in India, actually, they targeted the leisure crowd. The major focus was to get the trained people on board, okay? And that was a decade ago, early 2000. Midway through, they changed the focus, okay? And then they saw the potential in getting the business traveler on board. In current scenario, I don't know who is competing with whom, whether low-cost carriers are competing with full-service carriers, or full-service carriers are competing with the low-cost carriers. Basically, the service difference is diminishing, okay, between the two. Price point, I don't see much different. Service point, I don't see much different. So here is a challenge with the full-service carrier now, that how do they sustain that? Low-cost carriers have changed the perspective in India. and they are here to stay.
But considering, that there is so little to differentiate between low-cost carriers and your full-service carriers, especially so in India, how is the business traveler viewing this development? And how has his or her needs changed within the period of time that low-cost carriers have emerged in eminence in the Indian market?
I think when you look at the last, say, 5 years, there have been a lot of changes. I think driven from the 2008 crisis, there's been one, a change in travel policy. Travel policies have become a lot more conservative, more focused on an ROI. Second, travelers no longer are preferring or regarding travel as a perk. They are now regarding it more as a necessity. The customer today is really looking for value. Value could be price, it could be comfort, it could be timeliness, it could be punctuality, it could be any number of things. But essentially, the game which the LCCs are really focusing on today is how do I fit to that business need?
Right.
And that's really the approach that both the customer is taking when he evaluates the options and the suppliers are taking when they're looking at this business traveler who has a choice to go between one or the other end. So I think as things evolve, there would be need for greater segmentation of a product to be suiting the needs of a business traveler versus the needs of a leisure traveler. The future will be airlines getting more segmented, even in the low-cost space, to really say what's the difference between an AirAsia, an Indigo, and a SpiceJet, and that will be the way it will go in the future.
So that's the evolution that you're thinking about.
So that's been happening over the last few years, and I think it will continue to get more specialized and focused in terms of how the solutioning will take place.
Peter, you just took a long-haul flight. In terms of what you're looking for, and especially when you're doing a long-haul flight and being a business traveler, obviously you can pay more. There is more unbundling happening, and you're seeing that pay out as well.
I think on short-haul flights, anything under 4 hours, it's back of the plane, and it can be pretty cramped. And as a consequence of that, what I think is really important is what people like EasyJet are doing at this point in time, which is allowing you to reserve a seat.
Yeah.
So when you fly on EasyJet, you can not only reserve a seat, but you can get speedy boarding, and you can get extra leg room. Now, sure, it costs me extra money to for each one of those items, but as a business traveler, for me, that's an absolute essential. So,
in terms of the evolution of low-cost carriers to be able to serve the needs of a business traveler better,
Yep.
how do you see that panning out?
They have strategized themselves, and that's what I said. It evolved from a leisure traveler to business traveler. They did, business travel is very uncertain kind of thing. So low-cost carriers have started accommodating that. For corporate travels, they do accommodate a couple of changes free because your travel schedules are not perfect. They have accommodated to book your seats in advance, block your seats. So whatever a full-service carriers were giving, even they include meals for corporate. And more importantly, what actually won the confidence of corporates to use this low-cost carriers was safety and security. When it started, that was a big question mark that that's not an ITA airline, whether it's safe to travel, what to do. But it was all clarified later that whether it's an ITA or a non-ITA airline, they are governed by the DGCA policy in India for domestic sectors. So if it is, so they need to meet the safety and security standards of DGCA. So once that was clarified, safety security was taken care. On-time performance was taken care. They have a better turnaround now. So that's where they actually made the difference. So when it is an on-time performance, safety, security, I don't think business travelers have a problem.
On-time performance, very important. You think?
now, the one big difficulty I think that there is with low-cost carrier travel in terms of a corporate perspective is actually trying to understand how much it really costs you. So there's no published fare in terms of a low-cost carrier, and there's all these add-ons, including, if I'm on board and I buy myself a coffee and a sandwich and, something to eat, and I expense that through my expense report, does that go to the cost of the flight? And if you compare that to a traditional carrier, how much would it have cost me on the traditional carrier? And we can clearly see that when we track corporate travel spend very closely, which obviously as a TMC is one of our key sort of goals, is to be able to demonstrate, what did you spend on travel. It becomes quite clear that in some cases, the low-cost carriers are actually, whilst they appear cheap at a base level, are not actually that cheap once you add on all the extras that, your corporate traveler is going to want to have or experience as part of even a short-haul trip.
Sure. Just to kind of step back a little bit and understand the scenario, as it were, when you talk about the aviation industry, and obviously business needs to flourish around the world for business travel to flourish. And we're seeing some green shoots already in the US. People are talking about a recovery. Now, in terms of this process of recovery, how quickly is the Asian aviation market contributing to the global recovery in the aviation space as you see it right now?
Well, it's interesting about the US recovery because there is talk about recovery in the US. Although what we are starting to see now coming out of the G8 is that the US are going to tighten fiscal policy and sort of pull back on government spending for the first time. And they've had a very different approach to dealing with the economic recession to that, which we've had in Europe. In Europe, we've had austerity for a number of years now, whereas in the US, they've been sort of more liberal in their approach. But what we're starting to see is almost a convergence of those two models. In Europe, there's a lot of talk about the fact that governments are going to have to start spending money again on infrastructure projects in order to get economies moving. And actually in the US, we're seeing some talk about governments or government spending less money. So it'll be interesting to see whether the US economy slows up again or whether it continues to drive forward. There's no doubt, though, that the BRIC nations, Brazil, China, India, have really kept the world economy ticking over the last sort of 3, 4, or 5 years.
To add to what Peter said, I think Indian low-cost carriers, particularly Indigo as an example, is the fastest growing low-cost carrier worldwide. They are doing something right. It's a very aggressive marketplace. They've won share from full service. They've consolidated their position as an LCC. So I think these carriers are being watched by other markets as well. Sure. To say that if they can succeed in a market like this, which is price sensitive, which is uncertain, which has got fluctuating loyalties, then they are doing something right. I think a lot of things will change in the next year when AirAsia comes in. Right. Because it will again cause them to rethink the model, adjust to a new competitor and a very aggressive competitor. Right. And be compelled to, one, collaborate amongst themselves, which is a phenomena I saw in Brazil, where you get onto these shuttle flights, which are essentially budget flights. You could buy a ticket of TAM or GO or any other airline, and you just take basically a kind of a voucher and board whichever flight is boarding. So they have aggregated the resources with a view to bring down their costs, because then that's a specific segment. Right. You're targeting the shuttle traveler, and that's it. You're not giving any value. Right. But I think at the other end, they will have to differentiate and create value. So to Peter's point, a business traveler may not aspire to be in business class. He goes to business class only because that's the only place he gets the facility he needs. Sure. But I think the future might be in short haul, would be to create an elevated economy class or a premium economy class, which gives a business traveler probably a little more leg space, a little more ability to sit and work and be productive for those 4 hours that he spends doing a shuttle, doing Delhi, Bombay, Delhi, back. So I think,
of which we've seen happen already in Indigo or one of the low-cost.
They have started doing the ability to pre-book a seat and all the rest of it. But essentially, the seat, other than those maybe 12 seats that are on the extra leg space row, everything else is pretty much the same. Right. So I think over time, they will be compelled to create more value and make more money as well, because the business traveler would say, okay, you know what, if I pay $500 and I am more comfortable and I can use my 4 hours to do work and I don't get completely washed out by the end of the flight, then I would certainly pay that money to take that service. So there will be a demand for a product which is giving me the value as a business traveler, and I will be willing to differentiate and give my business to the carrier which gives me that differentiation.
So, in In terms of leveraging their position of low-cost carriers as it stands today, how do you see that happen with that kind of partnership, collaborations, even mergers?
I think low cost today, just to take to Armanath's point first, today, as he said, there's really little difference. I paid 18,000 rupees to come to Mumbai. Probably Jet was charging 18,500 and Air India was charging 17,000 or whatever. So I think there is a question on the low-cost model itself. Today on Indigo or a SpiceJet may be pricing at parity and sometimes higher than full service because there is just so much demand. There is, an absence of a couple of airlines which have now been wiped out altogether. I think when there is a level playing field, low cost will have to start being low cost. To Amarnath's point, today it's common. You have everyone doing the same thing, everyone selling the same product, charging the same price. So I think they will have to come to a situation where they say, I am a low cost, I have this value set that I bring to you as a consumer, this is the cost I charge, this is the cost arbitrage I give you, that is why you should work with us. Today, that unfortunately is not the situation. So I think EasyJet, Ryanair or Southwest, Virgin Blue, etc., those markets are very different from our markets in the sense that they are, there is a greater emphasis on clear segmentation of the product and the value. Going forward, there will have to be collaboration because there are a lot of fixed costs which are even today superfluous. Right. Every airline's got their own check-in staff. Every airline's got their own buses to take their passengers to their aircraft. And I think that inflection point will be reached over some time where these, 8 or 10 chaps will have to sit together and say, there has to be some part that we can work together on. It's like the mobile business. They're collaborating on mobile towers. Sure. The same thing will have to happen in this case because after a point, you can't bring down the cost any further. There is a certain fixed cost that will not go away. The second, to the earlier point on full service, are they going to disappear? I think the first and the most important step is what Peter mentioned, that if LCCs today start distributing on the global distribution platform, the full service market share will drop even further. Because again, it's a commodity being sold. How quickly I can access the commodity, how easily my travel agency can book it, will determine whether I go with commodity A or commodity B. But I am of the opinion that over the next 5 years or over the next 10 years, there will be segmentation, whether we call them then full service or value added or whatever we may call them. But there will be a market for suppliers who give a premium product at a premium price because they give significantly additional value. And I think that would be the way it would evolve over the next 5 to 10 years. I don't think it's happened in many markets, right? But I would like to hazard a guess that it will happen at least in India.
That's right. Have you seen it happen in any other markets?
No, I have to agree. I think the sort of demise of business class is probably, we're a long way from seeing that disappear. Even on European short haul, I think there'll always be a call for that. There'll always be 6, 7, 8 seats at the front of the plane that there's a call for that sort of service. It used to be 20 seats at the front of the plane. It's reduced greatly, but it's certainly not going to disappear. And there is going to be that requirement, even in Europe or in the US. One of the interesting trends I think we're seeing in the US, though, in terms of traditional carriers, is what you mentioned, mergers. And that's proved very interesting in terms of, say, Continental and United coming together. And what they've been able to do through those mergers is that there's a significant number of routes now in the US where there is only one available carrier to fly those routes. And on those routes, we've seen airfares increase by 13% in the last year. So it's not always downward pressure. Right. These traditional airlines are in a position to fight back if they get their act together. And they can be quite protectionist about their routes because everything's flown out of their hubs. So, it doesn't necessarily always mean that airfares are going one way and that's downwards. We're starting to see them actually going the other way as well.
So, the logical kind of thought when, things like that happen, when mergers, etc. happen, or perhaps when we saw Kingfisher go up. Yep. And that was seen as an opportunity. Capacities were reduced, and what LCCs did is hike their fares, losing out on the possibility of expanding the market, as it were.
Yes, they got an opportunity, they embraced it. But what future would demand from LCCs, just like full service carriers do have a published fare, LCCs also need to come out with published fare. Now, because in current scenario, they don't have a published fare, during the aviation industry crisis last year, low-cost carriers' fares were much higher than the full-service carriers' full-fare economy fares. They got an opportunity. So that thing needs to be taken, and people have realized it. So now today, when you actually go for earlier, there was a time when people used to blindly book onto low-cost carriers, assuming that it was low. It's not so today. Okay, people do compare with full-service carriers. And to Gaurav's point of, diminishing market for full-service carriers, I see they both have different segments to operate. Full-service carriers would operate mostly on a long-haul segment, where the demand of comfort, relaxations, and other stuff would be there. Short hauls would be probably taken over by LCC. So more of an LCC kind of thing in a short haul.
There is also the entire competition around the pricing, and that can get more aggressive as we see more players, etc. And we've already seen that, because I'm seeing that aggressive discounting during this traditionally weak period, which is between January and March. It's caused losses of $700 million in the fourth quarter of 2012, I think. Yeah, the last quarter. The last quarter had so many losses for airlines, and this is really because we got so aggressive when it came to discounting. Is that a challenge?
I think discounting, and particularly broadcasted discounting, where like SpiceJet did, X number of seats for 1 rupee, is basically a means of gathering market share. It's not really truly discounting as you would expect it to be, because you have only a certain limited number of seats per flight which can be sold. As soon as those 3 or 4 or 5 seats get sold, the inventory shuts down. So, what the business traveler or the market in general needs to understand is price is a factor of yield. As long as the airline makes the kind of yield it does, it will throw up these offers with a view to attract eyeballs, with a view to attract the passenger to come on board. This was what Head Egencia did when they had the 1 rupee ticket or whatever it was.
Yeah.
I would be surprised if even one person in this room actually flew on that 1 rupee offer. I never did. I never could get that seat. So I think it's a bit of a misnomer to say they're going to dump it, but yes, there will have to be pricing equalization and segmentation. That I think will not go. That actually will become more refined over the coming years with new competition coming on board.
When I look at a forum like this, I realize now just how important it really is for TMCs to be able to demonstrate the value add that they give, and to start trying to bridge that gap between where corporates and TMCs are and the relationship between them.
I think the forum, like the Business Travel Forum, gives the opportunity for particularly the travel buyer community to come and understand what is happening in the domain, what are the new challenges, what are the new issues that are coming up. And it becomes a very important networking and also education forum.